Well, there are calls for coordinated international action to investigate crimes against humanity by China in relation to its treatment of the Uighur ethnic minority. Human Rights Watch released a report today detailing allegations of mass detention, torture and cultural persecution. Joining us live with more is Elaine Pearson. She is the Australian Director at Human Rights Watch. Elaine, appreciate your time. We have known about these atrocities being committed by the Chinese against Uighurs for some time. What more does this report tell us, though, about how widespread and just how horrific those crimes really are?
Well, yes, Ash, I think we've spoken, in previous years about the mass arbitrary detention of Muslims in Xinjiang. But I think what's new about this report is that, we believe these abuses are widespread, are systematic, are the persecution of a group of people, their lives, their religion, their culture. And so that really extends to crimes against humanity, which is some of the serious violations of international law. So, what's unique about this report is that we think when crimes this serious are being committed, there really needs to be accountability for these crimes. And given that these crimes are sponsored by the Chinese state, we really need to see UN action, international action, to establish a commission of inquiry and ensure that there is a roadmap towards accountability for these crimes.
So just how vocal has the international community been, and what attention, if any, is the Chinese government actually paying to those protestations?
Well, I think the Chinese government is paying a lot of attention to, trying to whitewash its abuses. I mean, we saw just a couple of weeks ago, there was, the embassy holding a 2-hour press conference saying that everything's fine in Xinjiang. But the reality is everything is not fine. I mean, these are very serious abuses, and there have been a number of UN statements by concerned governments. Australia has joined a number of those statements. But what we haven't seen from the UN is we haven't seen an independent international investigation. And so we think that the UN can't keep waiting and can't keep just issuing statements of concern. We really look to the High Commissioner of Human Rights to establish an investigation regardless of whether or not the Chinese government grants access. I mean, I think for the last 2 years, the Chinese government has been delaying, engaging in delaying tactics by not wanting to sort of allow the UN's High Commissioner on Human Rights access to Xinjiang. Well, we're saying that there's enough evidence here that you don't necessarily need to set foot on the ground in Xinjiang. You can still have that investigation anyway.
Yeah, because the Chinese consistently deny the sort of claims that you're talking about. They argue that this minority group, the Uighurs, that they're terrorists, that they pose a terrorism risk to China. Is there any evidence suggesting that there's any truth in that?
Well, there have been isolated, incidents of violence that have occurred in the past, and certainly, it is that is, the justification that the Chinese government uses. It says that, these programs are about de-radicalization, that they're about vocational training for Uyghurs. But the reality is we are talking about, mass arbitrary detention of 1 million people. 1 million people, are not terrorists. And, inside those camps, we have documented very horrific abuses, including gang rape of women, torture of men and women, people being beaten, and then even outside of the camps, extensive surveillance of the Uyghur population, and of course, allegations of forced labour. So, this really means that governments need to act. And I think as far as the Australian government is concerned, what we'd really like to see is targeted sanctions against the Chinese government officials that are implicated in these abuses, as well as the entities that are responsible for these abuses.